When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I still remember the air of that night, thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a silence so vast it seemed to swallow the stars whole. We were just tourists, Americans on holiday, drifting through a country we thought we could map with cameras and casual curiosity. Vietnam was supposed to be temples, markets, food, laughter. It was never meant to follow us home in whispers. We stumbled into the mountains almost by accident, carried there by the promise of something authentic. A guide had spoken of villages where old customs still breathed, where spirits were not metaphors but neighbors. Some of us laughed, some of us shivered. None of us believed. That evening, the village welcomed us with lanterns swaying in the wind and bowls of rice wine pressed into our hands. Their eyes, dark, unblinking, watched us with a weight I could not name. And then, as though it were nothing unusual, the elder mentioned a ritual, a ceremony to call the dead. It was coincidence, they said, that we had arrived on the very night the spirits would be invited back. We thought it was fortune, a rare glimpse of culture. So we agreed. We thought we were observers, guests, safe. But as the drums began to beat, slow as a heartbeat buried under the soil, I realized something had shifted. There are moments in life when the world tilts, and you know you have stepped across a line you cannot return from. That was the night I first saw her, the woman who never should have been there. I was not alone that summer when I first set foot in the northern mountains of Vietnam. There were 6 of us, strangers at first, drawn together by the same glossy brochure that promised rice terraces like green stairways to the sky, misty mornings and villages untouched by time. We were Americans, yes, but not of the same mold. Each of us carried different reasons for being there, though none of us would have admitted how desperate those reasons really were. There was Mark, the former soldier, who had been stationed in Asia decades ago. He wore his silence like a second skin, chain smoking in the back of the van that ferried us up winding roads. I suspected he came here to exhume something from his past. Whether to bury it again or let it haunt him, I never asked. Then Susan, a middle-aged schoolteacher from Ohio. She said she wanted to see the world before it changed too much. She carried notebooks, always scribbling observations, as if the act of writing could tether fleeting moments to the page. Beside her sat David and Emily, newlyweds who thought rural Vietnam would be the perfect contrast to their city lives. They were in love, but already I could sense the hairline cracks in their laughter, the way David's eyes sometimes wandered when Emily spoke too long. Finally, there was Rachel, a journalist on sabbatical, or so she claimed. She had the restless air of someone searching for a headline in every shadow, every whispered word. And then there was me. I had no noble excuse, just a fascination with stories. Ghost tales, folklore, the kind of narratives people tell in hushed voices after dark. I told myself it was cultural curiosity, but deep down, I think I wanted to brush against the edges of fear. The road that brought us north was narrow, a serpent of cracked asphalt climbing higher and higher. Our driver, a local man named Hung, kept muttering about the weather. The sky above was bruised with clouds, and the forest pressed in on either side, dark and endless. Every so often, we passed shrines by the roadside, small stone altars dressed with incense sticks still smoldering. "They feed the spirits here," Hung said in broken English, his voice almost casual. "Hungry souls. Travelers must respect." We laughed politely, thinking it another charming detail of foreign superstition. But I noticed how Mark didn't laugh. He simply stared out the window at the twisting valley, his jaw tight, as if the smoke curling from those incense sticks carried memories he had tried for years to forget. The higher we went, the colder the air became. Windows fogged. The engine groaned. And then the village appeared, sudden as if it had been waiting for us, tucked against the side of the mountain where the clouds sank low enough to touch the rooftops. The houses were wooden stilt structures, their beams blackened with age. Smoke rose from hearths inside, mingling with the mist. Chickens scattered at our arrival, and children peeked from behind woven doors, their eyes wide with both curiosity and caution. We stepped out of the van into earth soft from recent rain. Our boots sank slightly, and the air smelled of damp soil and firewood. For a moment, I felt as if we had stepped not into a place, but into another time, one immune to the noise of the modern world. The elder came to greet us. He was a man whose face looked carved from bark, deep lines, eyes like polished stones. He wore a dark indigo robe, simple yet dignified, and spoke softly through Hung, who translated for us. "Welcome. Tonight is important. You arrive by fate." At those words, Emily clapped her hands lightly, whispering about how authentic this experience would be. David smiled indulgently, pulling her close. Susan was already scribbling in her notebook. Rachel raised an eyebrow, sensing a story. Only Mark stiffened, muttering something under his breath that none of us caught. We were shown to a communal house where mats had been laid out. Lanterns hung from the rafters, swaying gently in the draft. Women brought bowls of steaming rice and bitter, fiery rice wine. We ate in near silence, the sounds of the village humming outside, dogs barking, crickets weaving their relentless chorus, the low murmur of voices preparing for something. And then the elder spoke again. "Tonight," Hung translated, "we call to the ancestors. We open the way for spirits to return. You may join if you wish, but you must be respectful. The dead listen." I remember the way those words hung in the air, like incense smoke refusing to disperse. The dead listen. David chuckled nervously. "Like ghosts?" The elder didn't smile. He only nodded once, eyes unreadable. The rest of the group reacted in predictable ways. Susan's pen scratched furiously. Rachel leaned forward, questions already forming on her tongue. Emily clapped again, half excited, half afraid. Mark lit another cigarette. As for me, my skin prickled. I had read about rituals like this in fragments of folklore, but to be offered a seat inside one was different. It was like stepping across a threshold into the story itself. We agreed, of course. We were tourists. We wanted stories to tell back home. None of us thought of consequence. None of us thought the line between witness and participant could be so thin. The evening deepened. Shadows pooled in the corners of the house. Outside, the sky darkened until the mountains became only darker shapes against darker sky. The villagers gathered near the central square, carrying bundles of incense, drums, and long bamboo flutes. Children were ushered inside, though some peered from windows with eyes far older than their years. I stepped outside for air and found myself staring at the hills rolling away into blackness. A single bell rang, its sound thin and metallic, drifting across the valley. My breath fogged, though it was summer, and in that moment I felt it, the sense that we were not alone, that the forest itself leaned closer to listen. Mark joined me, cigarette glowing like a small defiant ember. "Don't you feel it?" he asked quietly, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "Feel what?" He exhaled smoke, like we're walking into something we don't understand, something we shouldn't. I wanted to answer, but the drums began then, slow, steady, the sound of earth itself beating. The ritual had begun, and we, wide-eyed strangers, far from home, were already inside it. The road wound upward like a serpent, each bend a sharp curve that made the van creak and sway, as though it were resisting the mountain itself. I remember gripping the side of my seat as we climbed higher, the engine laboring, the smell of gasoline mixing with damp air seeping through the cracked windows. We had left behind the comfort of paved highways hours ago. Now the wheels churned over broken stones, mud-slick patches and narrow strips that seemed one wrong turn away from dropping us into the abyss of the valley below. The jungle pressed against us on both sides, dense with shadows that swayed as though alive. "Scenic route, huh?" David muttered, trying to lighten the tension. His voice wavered with each jolt. Emily squeezed his hand and laughed too brightly, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Susan wrote even now, her notebook braced against her knees, recording every detail. Children by the roadside, shrines decorated with fruit, women carrying bundles of wood. She narrated softly, as though saying it aloud kept her from noticing how the road narrowed to nothing more than a ledge. Rachel, restless, kept her camera out, snapping pictures that would never capture the unease threaded through the silence. Mark sat in the back corner, cigarette dangling from his lips, smoke curling toward the roof. His eyes never left the trees beyond the glass. It was Hung, our driver, who broke the silence. His English was rough, his voice flat, but the words carried weight. "You see shrines?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Incense burning. For spirits. Hungry spirits. They wait on the road." Emily gave a small gasp, unsure whether to laugh or shiver. "Hungry? Like they eat?" Hung nodded once. "Food, smoke, prayers, or they take from travelers." His words sat between us like an unwelcome passenger. Susan scribbled furiously, while David shook his head, whispering, "Tourist gimmick." But when I looked at Mark, I saw his jaw tighten. He muttered something low, maybe a curse, maybe a memory, and tapped ash into an empty bottle. The higher we climbed, the more oppressive the air felt. The mist began to roll down from the peaks, thin at first, then thick as milk. It gathered in pockets along the road, swallowing the van, spitting us out again. The headlights made walls of white that dissolved only at the last second. And in that mist, things seemed to move. Shapes, tall and crooked, that disappeared when I blinked. The rhythm of the engine sounded too much like a heartbeat, strained and uneven. I told myself it was only nerves, only fatigue. Then came the first sound. Not from the van, not from us, but from outside. A hollow knock, like wood against wood, echoing faintly in the distance. 1, 2, 3, then silence. "What was that?" Emily asked, clutching David's arm. "Probably just—" David began, but Hung cut him off. "Drums," he said simply. "Calling." The word lingered. Calling what? Calling who? None of us asked. We passed another shrine, this one larger, the paint peeling from its wooden beams. A clay pot sat before it, smoke rising in thin threads from incense that had burned low. Fruits lay rotting at its base, split open, their scent sweet and cloying. Rachel raised her camera, but Hung snapped sharply. "No picture." His eyes, usually calm, hardened. "Why not?" Rachel challenged, lowering the lens only slightly. "Respect," Hung said. "Spirits don't like cameras. Take picture. Maybe they follow." That silenced her. She capped the camera with a mutter, but I noticed her hands trembled more than she let on. Mark let out a dry laugh, humorless. "Should have taken the beach vacation, huh?" His voice was gravel, his eyes still locked on the fog. No one answered. At one point, the van slowed to a crawl. The headlights revealed something in the road ahead. Footprints, deep and clear in the mud. Bare feet, small like those of a child. But the strange part was their direction. They led from the drop-off at the side of the road, up to the middle of the asphalt, and then stopped. No return, no continuation, just ended. The van idled there, the engine rumbling softly. We all leaned forward, peering out. "Children?" Susan whispered. "In this weather?" David asked. "Up here." "No child," Hung said firmly, his knuckles tight on the wheel. He crossed himself in a motion unfamiliar to me, not Christian, but something older, tapping fingers to forehead, lips, and chest. Then he pressed the accelerator, guiding us over the prints as though afraid to linger. For the first time, I saw real fear in his face. Conversation died after that. The mist grew heavier, muffling sound, turning our van into a small capsule of breath and heartbeat. Hours seemed to pass, though the clock insisted it was only minutes. I stared out the window, trying to pierce the fog. At one bend, I swore I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line. A woman in dark cloth, hair hanging loose, face obscured. My chest tightened and I blinked hard. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I did not tell the others, not then. But I think Mark saw her too, because he dropped his cigarette, grinding it out with unnecessary force, his hands shaking as he lit another. We stopped once, near a stream that cut across the road. The van rattled as it rolled through the water, and Hung stepped out to check the tires. The rest of us stretched stiff limbs, grateful for air that wasn't thick with smoke and fear. The stream whispered over rocks, silver in the fading light. Trees towered above us, their trunks slick with moss, their leaves whispering secrets we couldn't understand. Somewhere an owl hooted, a low, mournful sound that seemed out of place in the early evening. Susan wandered a few steps, sketching the scene in her notebook. Rachel crouched by the stream for a better photo. Emily clung to David, muttering about how eerie it felt. It was Mark who drifted farther than the rest, standing at the tree line, his posture rigid. "You okay?" I asked, approaching cautiously. He didn't look at me. "This place," he muttered, "smells like old blood." I laughed uneasily. "It's just the damp earth." But his expression never changed. "You hear it?" "Hear what?" "Crying. Out there." He gestured toward the trees. I strained my ears. Only water and wind. But his certainty unsettled me more than any sound could have. When we finally climbed back into the van, the atmosphere had shifted. Even David had stopped joking. Emily leaned against him silently. Susan's pen no longer moved, and Rachel's camera remained capped. The mist thinned briefly as we neared the crest of the hill, revealing the valley stretched below, a sea of green swallowed by shadows. And there, nestled in the fold of the mountain, the village appeared. Lanterns already glowed faintly, tiny sparks of orange against the darkening sky. "Almost there," Hung said softly, almost to himself. None of us cheered, none of us sighed with relief. We only watched in silence as the road curled down toward that waiting light, each of us aware, though none would say it aloud, that we had crossed into a place that belonged less to the living than it did to the dead. And from somewhere in the valley, faint but undeniable, the drums began again. Slow, hollow, calling. When the van finally rolled to a stop at the edge of the village, dusk had already fallen across the mountains. The mist hung low, soft and gray, blurring the outlines of the wooden stilt houses perched above the damp earth. Lanterns had been lit, their flames trembling in the wind like watchful eyes. We stepped down from the van stiff and weary, our shoes sinking slightly into mud slick with the day's rain. The air smelled of smoke and wet bark, a scent both heavy and strangely cleansing. It clung to my clothes, my hair, as though trying to mark me. Children stood at a distance, half hidden behind posts and woven mats, watching with solemn eyes. They did not laugh or wave. They simply observed. Their silence unnerved me more than any words could have. The elder approached then, the same man who had greeted us before. His steps were slow but certain, and the crowd parted quietly to let him through. His robe, indigo-stained and frayed, brushed the earth as he walked. His face was lit from below by a lantern, the lines carved deeper in shadow, his expression unreadable. He raised his hand in a gesture neither welcome nor warning. "You arrive on night of calling," Hung translated beside him. "Very rare, very serious. You may sit." We glanced at one another, unsure. "Sit?" Rachel asked cautiously. "In ritual," Hung clarified. "Tonight we open door for ancestors. We ask them to walk again. For a little while. You may witness." David's eyes lit up, the thrill of novelty overtaking fear. Wow, can you believe this? We're lucky. This is incredible. Emily nodded, clinging to his arm though her smile was thin. Like stepping into history, she whispered, though I wasn't sure she believed it herself. Susan, ever the teacher, scribbled furiously. I could already see her lesson plans forming, the tales she would bring home to wide-eyed students. The night I witnessed a spirit ritual in Vietnam. Rachel, meanwhile, was calculating angles, frames, headlines. This could be major, she muttered almost to herself. Her fingers itched toward the camera she'd promised not to use, but she restrained them. And Mark. Mark only stared, the ember of his cigarette flaring and dying in rhythm with his breath. You sure this is a good idea? He asked no one in particular. The elder waited, patient, eyes lingering on each of us as if weighing our worth. When none of us stepped back, he gave a single nod and motioned for us to follow. We were led into the heart of the village, where a wide packed earth clearing stretched between the houses. Fires had been lit in iron bowls, the smoke curling upward in thick ribbons that merged with the mist. Around the edges of the square, villagers gathered silently, their faces flickering with orange light. At the center stood a low altar carved from rough wood, decorated with offerings, bowls of rice, roasted meat, bunches of bananas spotted with age. Dozens of incense sticks jutted from clay pots, already smoldering, the smoke rising like skeletal fingers. Behind the altar hung a heavy curtain of black cloth, swaying slightly as if something moved behind it. My skin prickled. The place between, Hung explained softly, behind curtain, where spirit waits. The elder gestured, and mats were placed for us near the front. We sat awkwardly, our foreign clothes and restless movements glaringly out of place amid the villagers' stillness. The silence pressed on me like a hand. Then the first drum beat came. It was deep, hollow, resonant, as though struck not with wood but with bone. One note, then another, slow and steady. The sound seemed to come from the earth itself, vibrating through the soil, crawling up my spine. More drums joined, their rhythms weaving a pattern like a heartbeat. Bamboo flutes added a mournful cry, rising and falling like breath. Women's voices, raw and low, began to chant. The language was foreign, but the cadence needed no translation. It was summoning. The air thickened with incense, acrid and sweet, filling my lungs until I coughed. Around us the villagers swayed gently, eyes half closed, hands raised in unison. And then I noticed her. She sat among the villagers, just beyond the firelight. A woman in a dark indigo robe, her face partly hidden by a veil of black hair. She sat perfectly still, not swaying like the others, not chanting, not even blinking. At first I thought she was simply shy, perhaps a mourner sitting apart. But something about her posture unsettled me. The stiffness, the way her hands rested limp in her lap, as though carved from wax. I nudged Susan, whispering, "Do you see her?" Susan glanced, frowned, and nodded absently before returning to her notebook. But when I turned back, the woman's head had shifted. She was staring directly at me. My breath caught. The ritual grew heavier. The drumming quickened, the chanting louder, the flames brighter. The black curtain at the altar swayed, though no wind blew. I felt a sudden chill against my skin, as if an unseen hand had brushed me. Emily whispered to David, her voice thin with fear. "I don't like this. We shouldn't be here." David squeezed her hand but kept his eyes on the altar, enthralled. Rachel muttered, "Unbelievable," her hands twitching toward the camera again. And Mark sat rigid, fists clenched on his knees, sweat beading on his forehead, though the air was cool. The elder's voice rose, powerful, guttural, carrying words that seemed to pull at the edges of reality itself. The villagers responded in unison, their tones vibrating the very air. And then, from behind the curtain, came the sound of breathing. It was faint, shallow, but unmistakable. A drawn inhale, a rattling exhale. Again and again. I leaned forward without meaning to, heart pounding. The curtain rippled, and a shape pressed faintly against the cloth, as though someone stood just behind it. A murmur rippled through the villagers, but none stepped back. They bowed lower, chanting harder. The woman in indigo, however, remained motionless. Only her head turned again, her face still shrouded by hair, her gaze locked on me with unwavering intensity. I looked away, shivering. When I glanced back, she was gone. The ritual continued for hours, or minutes. Time lost meaning amid the drums and chants, the haze of smoke, the oppressive silence between breaths. My mind blurred, half dream, half wake. At some point, I thought I heard whispers threading through the noise. Not in English, not in any language I knew, but they seemed directed at me, curling into my ears like smoke. Come closer, come closer. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was fatigue. But when I opened them again, the curtain had stilled, the altar quiet, and the villagers bowed in silence. The ritual had ended. The elder looked at us then, his expression grave. Through Hung, he spoke. Tonight, door opened. Spirits walked. Some stayed. He let the words linger, his eyes heavy upon us. And in the corner of my vision, I thought I saw her again. The woman in indigo, watching from the shadows. The first drumbeat did not come from the square, or from the villagers who had already set down their instruments. It came later, deep into the night, long after we thought the ritual had ended. I remember lying on the mat inside the communal house where they had given us shelter. The others were scattered nearby. David and Emily curled against each other, Susan still scribbling in the half-light until exhaustion finally pressed her eyes shut. Rachel fidgeting with her recorder, even after promising she'd leave it off, and Mark staring at the ceiling, cigarette stub glowing faintly before he crushed it into a clay bowl. The house creaked with the slow breathing of the mountain. Outside, insects sang in layers, and the air carried the mingled scents of smoke and rain. I should have been tired. We had traveled all day, endured roads that twisted like a snake's body, but sleep would not come. The elder's final words clung to me. Some stayed. Then it came, a hollow thum, distant but heavy, as though it struck the soil beneath us. I sat up, heart lurching. The others stirred too. Emily clutching David, Susan lifting her head, pen still in her fingers. Was that? Rachel whispered. Another beat followed. Thum. Slow. Deliberate. Echoing through the valley. Mark swore under his breath. Drums! We hurried to the doorway. Outside, mist clung low to the earth, glowing faintly under scattered lanterns. The square was empty. The villagers had gone, their fires reduced to embers. Yet the sound continued, rolling through the fog. Drums struck in rhythm, slow as a heartbeat. But no hands played them. Maybe. Echo, Emily tried. Her voice shook. No echo lasts this long, Mark muttered, stepping onto the damp earth. His silhouette looked almost spectral in the fog. That's coming from somewhere. From someone. The beats grew louder, closer. Then beneath them, another sound emerged. A low chant, voices layered and raw. Susan clutched her notebook like a shield. It's still the ritual. Maybe they're continuing it privately? But even she didn't believe her own words. We followed the sound, drawn against our will, past the square, past the stilt houses where shadows moved behind woven doors. No one came out to join us. The villagers stayed inside as though walls and silence could shield them. The road sloped downward toward the river. There, through the trees, we saw them, figures in the fog swaying to the beat. Lantern light flickered off their robes. The rhythm pounded, steady, deliberate. But as we approached, I realized something was wrong. The figures did not move like villagers. Their motions were jerky, stilted, like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Their feet never quite touched the earth, And when the fog shifted, I thought I saw emptiness where faces should have been. Emily gasped. David pulled her back, though his own face was pale. Rachel raised her recorder instinctively, but Mark slapped it down. "Don't!" he hissed. "Don't you dare!" The chanting swelled. I could not understand the words, but the cadence wormed into my skull, vibrating behind my eyes. For a moment I swore I heard my own name carried in the rhythm. The curtain from the altar came to mind, that heavy black cloth that had swayed though no wind touched it, the breath I had heard from behind it, and the woman in indigo, motionless, watching. She was there now, at the farthest edge of the swaying figures. She stood perfectly still, her hair a dark veil, her hands limp at her sides. The others jerked and bent in rhythm, but she did not move. She only watched us. I froze, every instinct screaming to turn away, to retreat. But her gaze locked me in place, colder than the mist, heavier than the drums. Then without a sound, she lifted her hand and pointed. Not at the group, at me. My breath caught. For a moment I thought my knees would give way. The drums ceased instantly. The figures froze mid-sway. Silence crashed down like a stone, heavier than sound itself. Even the insects outside seemed to stop. The woman's hand lowered. She stepped once toward us, slow, deliberate, though her feet barely touched the earth. The fog curled around her form like a living thing. And then she was gone, not vanished with speed, not fled, simply not there anymore, as though the mist had swallowed her whole. The drums did not resume. The chanting died completely. The clearing was empty, save for us and the echo of fear. We stumbled back to the communal house in silence. None of us wanted to admit what we had seen. Rachel muttered about tricks of the fog, about mass hysteria. Susan whispered prayers she hadn't uttered in years. Emily wept softly against David's chest. Mark smoked again, his hands trembling so badly the lighter clicked 3 times before catching. He didn't look at any of us when he said, "That wasn't for show. That wasn't them. That was something else." I didn't argue, because I knew he was right. That night sleep was impossible. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of the wind made my heart leap. I kept expecting to hear the drums again, to see her standing in the doorway, pointing, waiting. Instead came something worse. Near dawn, as gray light seeped through the slats, I felt warmth against my ear like breath, and a whisper, faint and intimate. "You heard me." I turned sharply. No one was near. The others still slept fitfully, wrapped in uneasy dreams. But on the floor near my mat, the earth was damp, as though someone had stood there with bare feet, watching me. Morning came gray and thin, as though the sun itself hesitated to climb above the mountains. Mist still clung to the village, thick enough to blur the edges of the wooden stilt houses. The fires from the night before had died, leaving only trails of smoke rising from damp ashes. I had not slept. None of us really had, though we pretended otherwise. Dark crescents shadowed Emily's eyes. David's jaw was clenched tight, and Susan's pen moved slower than usual, as though even words resisted her hand. Rachel fussed with her recorder, playing back empty static that she swore had captured something. Only Mark seemed unchanged, chain-smoking with the same grimness as before. We gathered around a low table where bowls of sticky rice and salted vegetables had been placed. The villagers moved quietly around us, polite but distant. Their glances slid past us as though we were already fading into memory. And then I saw her. She sat at the far end of the communal house, half hidden in shadow. The same woman I had seen the night before. Indigo robe, black hair veiling her face, hands folded neatly in her lap. No one had announced her presence. No one seemed to notice she was there. I blinked, certain fatigue had conjured her. But when I looked again, she was still seated, still motionless, her gaze fixed not on the food, not on the others, on me. I froze, spoon halfway to my lips. "Are you all right?" Susan asked softly, following my stare. Her eyes widened. Who is she? The words slipped out before she could stop them. But when David turned to look, his brows knitted. Who? There, Susan insisted. At the... She stopped. The corner was empty. Susan's face drained of color. She lowered her pen slowly, her lips parting with a silent exhale. We left the house soon after, urged gently by the villagers to walk the terraced fields. They called it hospitality. I suspected it was a way to move us out of the square, while they prepared for something else. The path wound between rice paddies shimmering with water, the mountains looming like silent sentinels. The beauty should have calmed me. Instead, every ripple in the water looked like a face forming and dissolving. Rachel fell into step beside me. You saw her too, didn't you? I hesitated. Who? The woman, she said firmly. By the altar last night. By the house this morning. Susan mentioned her. You saw her. I did not answer, but the silence was enough. Rachel exhaled. Good. I was starting to think I was going mad. Maybe we both are, I said. She gave a humorless smile. Then at least I'm not alone. We returned by noon. The village felt different, heavier, though the sun had broken through the mist. The elder stood in the square, speaking softly to a group of men. Their faces were grim. When he saw us, his eyes lingered a fraction too long, as if measuring whether we belonged there at all. Inside the communal house, the air was stifling. Smoke from incense hung thick, clinging to my throat. The mats had been rearranged, forming a circle around the altar. The black curtain had been rehung, motionless despite the draft. And she was there again, this time not hidden in corners, not fading in and out. She sat among the villagers, robed dark against the woven mat, hair veiling her features. None of the others acknowledged her. They sat as though the space beside her was empty. I stared, heart hammering. Her head lifted slightly. And though her face remained obscured, I felt her eyes lock onto mine. The ritual resumed. Drums struck in slow cadence. Flutes crying like distant birds. The villagers swayed, their chants weaving through the thick incense smoke. The woman did not move. Her lips never parted. Her hands remained limp. Yet when the elder's voice rose, her head tilted as though in answer. I couldn't look away. Something in her stillness demanded attention, louder than any drum. The others seemed oblivious, caught in their own unease. Only Susan shifted uncomfortably, scribbling fragments that made no sense. Mark leaned toward me, whispering, "She's not with them." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "She's not one of them," he said flatly. "I know the look of the living. She isn't." The drumming quickened. The villagers rocked harder, their voices raw. The curtain behind the altar stirred, though no wind touched it. I felt that same chill as before, crawling across my skin like frost. The air thickened until every breath was labor. Then it happened. The woman lifted her head fully. The hair parted just enough to reveal a sliver of face. Skin pale as wax, lips colorless, eyes hollow, black as unlit wells. Susan gasped audibly, her notebook slipping from her hands. Rachel clutched my arm, nails digging through my sleeve. Emily whimpered against David's shoulder. Mark only whispered, "I told you." The woman stood, slowly, stiffly, as though her joints had long forgotten the act. She rose without sound, without ceremony, her robe hanging heavy around her. The villagers did not react. Not a single head turned. To them, she was invisible. But to us, she was the only thing in the world. She began to walk, each step deliberate, feet barely brushing the mat. Her gaze swept over the group, pausing briefly on Susan, lingering on Rachel, passing across Emily and David. Then it returned to me. Her lips parted. No sound emerged. But in my mind, I heard it as clearly as a whisper against my ear. "You heard me." I staggered back, heart racing. My legs wanted to run, but I was pinned by her gaze. Rachel hissed, "Do you hear that? She's speaking." David shook his head wildly. "No one's speaking. It's in your head." Susan clutched her pen like a weapon, muttering prayers. Emily wept silently, her face buried in David's arm. Mark rose to his feet, defiance in his stance. "What do you want?" he demanded. His voice cut through the chanting like a blade. The woman turned her head toward him. For the first time, I saw her lips move. Just one word, soundless yet undeniable. "Stay." The drums ceased. The chants fell silent. The villagers froze mid-motion, eyes half closed, as though caught in trance. The smoke curled around us thicker, suffocating. The woman's form flickered, blurred, then stilled again. She lowered her hand, pointing once more. At me. Then as suddenly as she had risen, she was gone. The villagers stirred as if waking from sleep. The elder continued the ritual without pause, his voice never faltering, as though nothing unusual had occurred. But we knew. We had seen her, and she had seen us. That night, long after the drums ended, I lay awake on the mat, trembling. The whisper echoed through me, over and over. Stay. And for the first time, I wondered if leaving this village was even possible. The air that night carried a weight I could not name. It pressed down on the skin like a damp cloth, heavy, suffocating. The ritual had ended hours before, but its echo clung to us as surely as the smoke that still hung in the rafters. None of us spoke much during the meager meal the villagers placed before us. Bowls of rice, strips of dried fish, bitter greens boiled soft. The food tasted of ash in my mouth. Emily barely touched hers, her hands trembling too much to hold chopsticks. David tried to coax her, whispering comfort, but his own voice wavered. Susan wrote and rewrote in her notebook, the pages filling with frantic scratches rather than tidy observations. At times she stopped, staring at what she had written as though the words were not her own. Rachel toyed with her recorder, flicking it on and off, capturing fragments of silence as if desperate for proof that what we had seen had not been collective madness. Mark smoked, one after another, his face obscured by a haze of his own making. He said nothing, but I noticed the way his shoulders twitched with every sound outside. The creak of wood, the bark of a dog, the shifting of wind. And I kept hearing it. That single word, breathed without sound, echoing in my skull. Stay. When the villagers finally withdrew, leaving us alone in the communal house, we settled uneasily onto our mats. The lantern light flickered low, shadows pooling like dark water across the floor. For a while, only the sound of insects filled the silence. I tried to let it lull me, tried to imagine I was anywhere else. But then came the change. The air stirred, not with wind. No draft passed through the house. It was more like a breath, soft, cold, deliberate. It brushed against my cheek as surely as if someone had leaned close. I flinched, sitting upright, scanning the shadows. No one stood near me, but then I heard it again, by Susan's mat this time. A faint inhalation, a slow exhale, though she slept fitfully, lips pressed tight. Emily whimpered suddenly, clutching David's arm. Cold, she whispered. Something's breathing on me. David tried to hush her, but his eyes darted wildly across the room. Rachel switched on her recorder, the red light glowing like a watchful eye. Listen, she whispered, and through the static, faint but undeniable, came the sound of breath, ragged, uneven, circling us like a predator unseen. Mark rose abruptly, knocking over a lantern. Its flame guttered, throwing the room into deeper shadow before he righted it. His voice was low, harsh. It's not wind. It's not your imagination. They've let something in. Stop, David snapped. You're scaring her. He pulled Emily close, but his own fear betrayed him. Mark only shook his head, dragging on his cigarette. If you're not scared, you're not paying attention. The breath circled again. I felt it pass by my ear, colder this time, sharp enough to raise gooseflesh. My lungs tightened, as though the unseen air tried to sync with my own. And then came a whisper, faint, almost drowned in the static of Rachel's recorder. Closer. Susan woke with a gasp, clutching her notebook to her chest. Did you hear it? Did you? Her words broke off. She was staring past us, toward the far corner of the room. We all turned. The corner was dark, the lantern light too weak to reach, but the shadows shifted there, rippling like fabric moved by an unseen hand. And then, for the briefest moment, a shape leaned forward, pale, indistinct, the outline of a face. I couldn't breathe. Emily let out a sob, muffled quickly by David's hand. Mark stepped between us and the shadow, his stance rigid. "You're not welcome," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The shape stilled. Then, as if mocking, the breath came louder. One drawn inhale, one rattling exhale. The lantern flickered violently. The air pressed down harder. And then the shadow receded, leaving only silence. We did not sleep that night. Hours crawled by. The recorder caught little but static, though at times Rachel swore she heard voices woven within. Susan's notes turned into frantic sketches of faces she claimed she didn't recognize. Emily shivered against David, her tears drying into exhaustion. At some point, Mark sat beside me, his cigarette a faint red glow in the darkness. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. He nodded grimly. "In the war, I felt things like that. When villages burned, when bodies were left unburied. The air itself breathes then. Hungry, always hungry." I said nothing. His words were too heavy to carry. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled out of the house like survivors of a storm. The mist clung low again, veiling the village in silver. The villagers went about their task quietly, eyes avoiding ours. Children fetched water from the stream. Women carried bundles of firewood. Men tended to animals. To them, nothing was wrong, or perhaps they simply pretended. The elder passed us without a word, but his gaze lingered just long enough to chill me. He knew. We gathered by the van, desperate for escape. David demanded we leave at once, Emily nodding vigorously beside him. Susan hesitated, torn between fear and fascination. Rachel argued for staying, convinced she was on the cusp of uncovering something monumental. Mark leaned against the van, arms crossed. "You can try to leave," he said softly, "but I don't think it'll let you." The breath returned then, faint but undeniable, curling through the morning air. Cold, patient, waiting. And I realized with dread that he might be right. Morning stretched slow and gray, as though the mountain itself wished to delay the day. We gathered at the edge of the square, where the villagers had begun their routines, feeding animals, mending nets, chopping wood. To anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary start to an ordinary day. But the air still carried the residue of what had pressed on us in the night, that invisible breath, cold and patient. David had insisted we leave at first light. Emily clung to his arm, nodding fiercely, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Susan argued that leaving suddenly might offend the villagers. Rachel shook her head, muttering about missing the story of a lifetime. And Mark only smoked, the ember of his cigarette the sole point of brightness in his expressionless face. I stood with them, torn between their voices. My skin still prickled from the whisper I'd heard. Closer. I wanted distance from this place, yet something deeper, darker, kept me tethered. Then I noticed him. He stood across the square, half hidden by the mist. A tall man in a plain black jacket, his face pale beneath the lantern glow. He was not there when we first arrived, I was sure of it. Yet now he leaned casually against a post, watching. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing. The others turned. Susan frowned. "I didn't see him before." "Maybe he's one of the locals," David said quickly. "We can ask him if there's another way down the mountain." But there was something off. He stood too still, his arms limp at his sides, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a voice none of us could hear. Rachel lifted her recorder instinctively. Finally, someone who might talk. She started toward him. The elder appeared suddenly, stepping into her path. His hand, though gentle, blocked her firmly. His expression was grave. No, Hung translated softly. No man there. We froze. What do you mean, no man? Rachel challenged. We see him. The elder shook his head. Not living? Rachel's laugh was brittle. That's ridiculous. But her steps faltered. The figure still stood there. And then he smiled. It was not warm, not kind. The smile was thin, stretched, as though painted onto his face. My stomach turned. Emily whimpered, burying her face against David's shoulder. Susan scribbled frantically, her pen scratching in broken lines. Mark flicked his cigarette into the mud, his jaw clenched. When I looked again, the man had moved. He was closer now, though I had not seen him walk. Rachel snapped her recorder shut with trembling fingers. Okay, maybe not an interview. By midday, we convinced ourselves it was exhaustion. The man had vanished when we returned to the communal house, and the villagers carried on as though nothing unusual lurked in their valley. But that evening, as we ate another meal in silence, he appeared again, this time seated among us at the low table. No one had seen him enter. He sat between David and Susan, his pale hands resting on the wood, his eyes blank and glassy. David jerked in surprise. What the hell? He scooted closer to Emily. Susan dropped her pen. Where did you come from? The man didn't answer. He only turned his head slowly, staring at me. My breath caught. The others noticed. Rachel whispered, He's looking right at you. Mark growled, Ignore him. But how could I? His gaze was hollow yet heavy, pressing against me like a weight. And then, in a voice flat and toneless, he spoke. You heard me. The words sliced through me. My skin went cold. My lungs locked. It was the same phrase I had heard whispered in the night. David shot to his feet. That's it. We're leaving. Right now. Emily clung to him, nodding furiously. The man did not move. His smile lingered, thin and painted, as he turned his gaze on David. You cannot leave, he said simply. The lantern sputtered. The air thickened. A chill crept over us all. Rachel clutched her recorder with white-knuckled hands. Susan muttered a prayer under her breath. Emily sobbed openly. And Mark stepped forward. Get out, he hissed. His voice carried a sharpness I hadn't heard before. You're not welcome here. The man tilted his head, regarding him almost curiously. I was invited. The villagers outside began to chant again, low and rhythmic, as though they too felt the presence in our house. The drums joined, hollow and slow. The man's smile widened slightly. He rose without sound, his movements too fluid, too silent. Then just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. The bowls of food remained untouched where he had sat. But when Susan glanced down, she gasped. His place at the table was wet, as though marked by water dripping from an unseen body. That night, none of us dared to sleep. We sat huddled together, lanterns burning low, waiting for dawn. Rachel whispered, Did you hear what he said? Invited. By who? No one answered, but I thought of the elder's words. Some stayed, and I remembered the woman's lips forming that one soundless word. Stay. Had we mistaken who she was speaking to? Was it not us she had called, but him? The thought chilled me more than the night air, because if that was true, then he had not come for us. He had come with us. Dawn should have brought relief. Instead, it arrived gray and bruised, the mist hanging thicker than ever, smothering the village in a silence that felt rehearsed. The drums had stopped sometime in the early hours, yet their rhythm still pulsed in my skull. Every beat carried the echo of his voice. I was invited. We gathered outside the communal house, hollow-eyed and brittle from sleeplessness. The villagers moved about as if nothing had happened. Women tended cooking fires, men led buffalo along the muddy path, Children carried buckets of water from the stream. Yet no one looked at us. Their eyes slid past us as though we had already ceased to exist. Emily whispered, "Why do they ignore us?" No one answered. It was Rachel who noticed the first sign. She had her recorder in hand, clicking through the static she'd captured overnight. "Listen," she insisted, pressing the device close. At first it was only hiss and crackle. Then beneath it, faint but clear, the sound of breathing, ragged, wet, uneven. We froze. "It circled us," Rachel said, her voice hushed with awe. "You can hear it moving, from one side of the room to the other. It wasn't our imagination." "Turn it off," David snapped. His nerves were raw, his arm locked around Emily's shoulders. "Just turn the damn thing off." Rachel obeyed reluctantly, but her eyes gleamed with the hunger of someone who had caught proof of the impossible. Later, when we tried to eat breakfast, Susan screamed. We rushed to her side where she pointed at her notebook. At first I thought she was overtired, hallucinating, but then I saw it. Her pages, filled with neat lines of writing, had changed. The words she'd written the day before, observations of food, clothes, architecture, were gone. In their place sprawled jagged scrawls, the ink darker, heavier, as though pressed by an unseen hand. And in English, not Vietnamese. "Stay, stay, stay." Over and over, filling 3 entire pages. Her pen dropped from her shaking fingers. "I didn't write this," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." The air seemed to grow colder. By midday, the signs multiplied. We stepped outside and found footprints in the mud. Bare feet, small as a child's, yet deep as if pressed by great weight. They began at the edge of the square, looped around the van, and ended abruptly against the wall of the communal house, as though whoever left them had walked straight inside. Emily cried softly, begging David to take her away. But when he opened the van door, he swore violently. The seats were soaked. Water pooled on the floor mats, dripping steadily from nowhere. The scent was brackish like river rot. "We can't drive like this," David muttered, slamming the door shut. "It'll short the engine." Mark lit another cigarette. "That's the point," he said flatly. "It doesn't want us to leave." That night the dogs began to howl. They weren't ordinary barks. They howled long and low, their voices trembling as though something pressed on their throats. The sound rose from every corner of the village, merging into a chorus that made the hairs on my neck stand upright. The villagers did not react. They remained inside, lanterns doused, windows shuttered. Only we stood in the square, frozen by the sound. Then came laughter, thin, high, echoing faintly through the mist. Not the laughter of joy, but the kind that crawled under your skin, mocking, knowing. "Tell me you hear that," Susan whispered. I nodded slowly, though my lips refused to form words. It circled us, darting from one side of the square to the other, though no figure appeared. Then just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I returned to the communal house shaken, only to find another sign waiting. On my mat lay a mirror I had never seen before. Small, handheld, its frame carved from dark wood. My reflection stared back at me, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. But behind me in the glass stood a second figure, a woman in indigo. I dropped the mirror instantly, the glass shattering across the floor. The others crowded around, demanding to know what happened. But the shards only reflected our own faces now, fractured and jagged. Only I had seen her. We barely slept again. Each hour brought a new disturbance. The sound of footsteps pacing the rafters, though no one walked there. Whispers threading through the smoke of extinguished lanterns. The sudden chill of unseen breath brushing against our necks. Emily grew pale and feverish, muttering incoherently in her sleep. David sat beside her, torn between protecting her and holding on to his own sanity. Susan refused to open her notebook anymore, binding it shut with string. "If it writes again," she said, "I don't want to see it." Rachel recorded everything obsessively, though her hands trembled so badly the device clattered against her teeth when she held it to her lips. Mark remained the only one who did not falter, but his silence was not strength. It was resignation, the calm of someone who had seen too much to hope. And I could not rid myself of the sense that all of this was directed at me. The stares, the whispers, the word carved into paper. Stay. Just before dawn, as we sat huddled together, the final sign came. A knock at the door. 3 times. Slow, hollow. We froze. No villager would come at this hour. Mark rose cautiously, motioning us back. He pulled the woven door aside. The mist pressed against the threshold. Nothing else. Then on the packed earth just beyond appeared words traced in wet mud. 2 short lines, stark and deliberate. You heard me. Morning came without warmth. The sky was the color of ash, the sun hidden behind a sheet of clouds that seemed to press lower with every hour. I could feel it. The valley was closing in on us. The villagers avoided our eyes more openly now. When we stepped into the square, mothers pulled their children indoors. Men turned their faces away. Even the dogs slunk low to the ground, tails tucked, as if they too sensed we carried something unwelcome. It was Susan who finally broke. Her voice cracked as she turned to me, her notebook clutched against her chest. We can't just pretend anymore. We need answers. We need someone to tell us what the hell is happening. Rachel nodded fiercely. The elder. He knows. He's been watching us. He hasn't said everything, David scoffed, though the sound was thin. And you think he's going to tell us? We're outsiders. He doesn't even want us here. But Mark stubbed his cigarette into the mud and looked up with hollow eyes. He'll tell us, because whatever this is, it's not finished. And he knows it. So we went to him. The elder sat before his house, his frame small but unbent, as though age had carved lines into him, but never broken him. He smoked a pipe carved from bone, the smoke curling upward to vanish into mist. At first he did not acknowledge us. We stood there awkwardly, shifting, waiting. Finally he raised his eyes. They were dark, reflective, like the surface of deep water. You want truth, Hung translated beside him, hesitant. But truth is heavy. Once you carry it, you cannot put it down. Then we'll carry it, Rachel said firmly, stepping forward. The elder studied her, then me, then the rest. At last he nodded. He gestured for us to sit. We gathered in a half-circle before him. The villagers kept their distance, as though afraid of the words about to be spoken. The elder began slowly, his voice low and rasping, yet steady. Hung translated in careful fragments. Long ago, this valley was not quiet. It burned with war. Foreign soldiers came. Bombs fell. Men died. Women died. Children too. The earth drank their blood. The river carried their cries. Mark stiffened at the words. He looked away, his jaw locked, smoke curling from his trembling hands. The elder continued. There was a woman, young. She waited for her husband, who had gone to fight. She prayed each day, burned incense, left food for the ancestors. But he did not return. Instead, men in uniforms came. They took her, hurt her, left her body in the river, no burial, no prayer. The words struck like stones. Emily whimpered. David pulled her close. Susan scribbled despite her shaking fingers, tears splashing onto the page. The elder's gaze darkened. She could not cross, no one called her. No family left to guide her. She stayed, angry, hungry, for justice, for breath. A long silence followed. Even Hung's voice trembled as he translated. Rachel whispered, "The woman in indigo." The elder inclined his head. "She waits when we call. Every year we open the door for ancestors. Most come, then go. But she does not. She looks for one who will see her, hear her. If you see, if you hear." His eyes settled on me. She follows. My skin crawled. I felt the other's stares burn into me. but I couldn't look away from the elder. "What does she want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The elder's pipe crackled as he drew in smoke. "To be remembered, to be avenged, or to take another breath. Through you." Emily sobbed openly now. David cursed under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. Susan clutched her notebook to her chest as if it might shield her. Rachel's recorder clicked on without her realizing it, capturing every tremor of the elder's voice. Mark finally spoke, his voice gravel. "Why let us near the ritual, then? Why let outsiders sit where she might find us?" The elder's eyes shifted toward him, unreadable. "Because fate brings who it chooses," Hung translated softly. "We do not invite, we only open the door. Spirits choose who walks through." The words hung heavy, undeniable. We stumbled back from his house shaken. None of us spoke for a long time. The village carried on around us, but its sounds, the clang of pots, the murmur of voices, the squeal of pigs, seemed distant, muffled, as though we had been pulled into another layer of reality. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "So that's it. She was wronged. She was left without rest, and now she's chosen one of us." Her eyes darted toward me. Susan followed her gaze, then quickly looked away. David muttered, "No offense, but she's been staring at you since the first night." I felt heat rise in my chest, though the air was cold. "You think I asked for this? You think I wanted—" "No one wants it," Mark cut in sharply. "But she doesn't care what you want. She wants breath. Yours." The words silenced us all. That evening, more signs appeared. On the path between the houses, fresh footprints again. Bare, wet, leading from the river straight to the square. But the mud was dry elsewhere. No rain had fallen. At the communal house, Susan's notebook opened on its own, pages fluttering until they stopped on a single line scrawled in jagged English. "Let me in." Rachel's recorder clicked on without touch, its red light blinking steadily. Through the static came a woman's voice, low, ragged, speaking in a language none of us knew. Yet I understood the rhythm, the demand. And in the van, David found the seats soaked again, though we had left the doors closed. The water smelled of iron this time, metallic and sharp. As darkness fell, Emily clutched David and whispered, "We have to leave. We'll walk if we have to. I can't stay here." David hesitated, torn. "It's too dangerous at night. We'll wait for morning." "There won't be a morning," Emily sobbed. "Not for us." Susan sat trembling, her notebook pressed shut beneath both hands. Rachel replayed the recording over and over, desperate for clarity. Mark smoked in silence, his face hollow. And I could feel her near, closer than before, breathing with me, breathing through me. The elder's words tolled in my head like a bell. To take another breath, through you. And for the first time, I wondered if my own lungs were still mine. The elder's tale clung to us like smoke, impossible to shake. Even as the sun set, staining the mist with fading light, I kept hearing his voice repeating the words, to take another breath, through you. By nightfall, the village seemed to hold its own breath. No laughter of children, no barking of dogs, no clatter of pots. The houses were sealed tight, lanterns extinguished. It was as though the villagers had retreated into silence, leaving us alone in a place that no longer belonged to the living. Inside the communal house, the air grew heavy. The lantern flames trembled weakly, shrinking with every gust that slipped through the cracks. The others sat close together, restless and frayed. David argued in a low voice. "At first light we leave. I don't care if the van runs or not. We'll walk if we have to. I'm not spending another night here." Emily nodded, pale and trembling. "Please, David, please." Susan clutched her notebook to her chest, rocking slightly as though it might shield her. Rachel recorded every word, though her hands shook so badly the device rattled in her grip. Mark only smoked, the tip of his cigarette glowing red in the dark like a warning light. He hadn't spoken in hours, and I My skin crawled with the certainty that she was already here. The first sign came with the lanterns. One by one, their flames guttered out. No draft moved through the house, yet each wick bent, sputtered, and died. Rachel hissed, "Light them again! Quick!" Mark struck a match, his hand steady. But as soon as the flame touched the wick, it flickered twice and went dark again. He tried another, and another. Each time the darkness swallowed it whole. Soon only one lantern remained, its light barely clinging, painting us in shadows. And then that too extinguished. We were plunged into absolute black. Silence. No, worse than silence. The kind of stillness that pressed against the ears, so heavy you could hear the blood in your veins. Then came the sound. Soft, deliberate. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. On the wooden floorboards, slow and measured, pacing in a circle around us. Emily whimpered, clutching David's arm. "Someone's in here." "No one's in here," David whispered, though his voice cracked. Susan's pen scratched blindly in the dark, desperate, as though recording the moment might anchor her sanity. Rachel fumbled with her recorder, its red light blinking faintly, the only illumination left, and through its static, we heard it, a woman's breath, shallow, ragged, moving closer. "Where are you?" Mark demanded, his voice rough. "Show yourself." The footsteps paused. Then from the far corner, a whisper so soft I wasn't sure if it was in the room or in my head. "I am here." The darkness shifted. I could see nothing, yet I felt her presence pressing closer, brushing the edge of my skin. Emily sobbed. Susan dropped her notebook, the pages fluttering open in the dark. And then the recorder caught it. Not a whisper, not breath. Laughter. Thin, hollow, female. The sound crawled into my chest, hollowing me out. A sudden crash. The mirror I had broken days before, the shards we had left swept into a corner, now lay scattered again, as though someone had walked through them. I felt one scrape against my ankle, sharp enough to cut skin. I flinched, reaching down. My fingers came away wet, but in the dark I could not tell if it was blood or water. Then a hand brushed mine. Cold, slim, too long. I recoiled violently, stumbling back into Mark. "She touched me," I gasped. The laughter ceased instantly, and for a moment the darkness was absolute and still again. We huddled together, too afraid to move, waiting for dawn that seemed it would never come. Then slowly the blackness lifted, not from lanterns, not from fire, but from the pale glow of moonlight seeping through the slats. And in that silver light, I saw her, the woman in indigo. She stood near the shattered mirror, her face half hidden by hair, her robe dark and wet as though dragged from the river. Her head tilted, her body swaying slightly, as though remembering the rhythm of drums. Her eyes, when she lifted them, were black voids, endless and consuming. Susan screamed. Emily fainted into David's arms. Rachel's recorder slipped from her grasp, and I, frozen, powerless, watched as she raised a hand and pointed at me. The moonlight dimmed, clouds swallowing it whole. Darkness reclaimed the room. Her voice brushed against my ear, closer than breath. "You heard me. You will stay." When dawn finally came, we were still alive, but we were not the same. Emily refused to rise from her mat, whispering feverishly in half-formed words. David hovered helplessly, his own eyes rimmed with terror. Susan's notebook was gone, vanished from where she had dropped it. Rachel replayed the recorder again and again, though it now captured nothing but static. Mark smoked in silence, staring at the doorway. And I knew with certainty that leaving would not save us, because she was no longer outside, waiting. She was inside, with us. When the night finally loosened its grip, the light of dawn felt wrong, thin, gray, weak, as if the sun itself refused to fully rise over the valley. We sat in silence, broken people clutching fragments of sanity. No one spoke of the woman we had seen. No one dared. Yet every one of us knew she had not vanished with the darkness. Emily was the worst. She lay curled on her mat, trembling, lips moving in whispers we couldn't understand. David tried to soothe her, brushing damp hair from her face, but his own eyes were hollow. He looked less like a husband comforting his wife and more like a man clinging to a lifeline already slipping from his hands. Susan sat stiff-backed, staring at the corner where her notebook had been. It had disappeared completely, as though it had never existed. Her empty hands twitched, searching for the comfort of pen and paper. Rachel played her recorder again and again, but only static answered. Still she listened, desperate for meaning inside the noise. Mark smoked until his fingers stained yellow, his expression unreadable, eyes shadowed by things we could not see. And my chest felt tight, my breath no longer my own. Each inhale seemed borrowed, each exhale demanded payment. It began with Emily. By midday, she no longer spoke in her own voice. At first it was mutters, low and slurred, in a language we didn't understand. Her words rose and fell like chants, her lips shaping syllables older than the valley itself. Emily, David shook her gently. Honey, look at me. Her eyes opened, but they were not hers. The warm hazel I'd seen since we left the city was gone, replaced by something black and bottomless, a reflection of the void that had stared at me from behind the indigo veil. David stumbled back. No! Susan gasped. Rachel whispered, Oh, God. Mark only muttered, It started. At first she only sat, whispering. Then she stood. Her movements were wrong, jerky, stiff, as though her body resisted every step. She swayed slightly, head tilting in that same unnatural rhythm. David rushed forward. Stop! You're scaring her! But when he grabbed her wrist, she turned on him with a strength that was not hers. With one violent motion, she flung him back. He crashed against the wall, gasping in shock. The rest of us froze. Emily, Susan pleaded, her voice trembling. Please, it's us. It's your friends. Emily's lips curved into a smile. But it wasn't Emily's smile. When she spoke, the words were flat, toneless, heavy as stone. You heard me. The same words, again and again, threaded through everything since the first night. Her gaze locked on me. You will stay. My blood ran cold. The others looked at me, fear and accusation in their eyes. It was me she wanted. It had always been me. Rachel hissed, She's chosen him. Susan shook her head violently. No, she's using Emily. We can't just... Mark cut her off, voice sharp. She doesn't want Emily. Emily's just the doorway. The possessed Emily swayed, her eyes still black voids, her smile widening. Her voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to seep into the floorboards, into our bones. Through you, I breathe. David, trembling, forced himself to his feet. He reached for Emily again, his voice breaking. Fight it, Em. Please. Don't let her... Emily tilted her head slowly, considering him. Then she leaned close, her lips brushing his ear. Whatever she whispered made his face drain of color. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Susan clutched her chest. Rachel shook her recorder, as though willing it to work. Mark stepped forward, cigarette smoke curling from his lips. Enough, he growled. Take me instead. For the first time, Emily's body stilled. Her black eyes turned to him. You are already hollow, she said, her voice cutting deep. No room left. Mark flinched as though struck, but he didn't move. The air thickened. Every breath burned, heavy with incense, though no stick smoldered. The walls of the communal house groaned as though straining against an unseen weight. Emily began to walk toward me. Each step was slow, deliberate, her feet dragging slightly as if she had risen from a riverbed. Her gaze never wavered. I stumbled back, heart racing. Why me? I whispered. Her smile deepened. Because you listened. The elder entered then, sudden and silent. His face was grim, his eyes dark hollows. He carried a bundle of burning herbs, the smoke sharp and acrid. He began to chant, low and guttural. Emily shrieked. The sound pierced the air, raw and inhuman. Her body convulsed, jerking violently as though pulled by invisible wires. David rushed to hold her, tears streaming. "Help her! Please, God, help her!" The elder did not look at him. He continued chanting, waving the smoking herbs in circles. The air grew hotter, the scent choking. Emily collapsed to the floor, writhing, her eyes rolling back. The elder's voice rose, a thunder of syllables older than any language I knew. And then, silence. She lay still. Her eyes fluttered open, hazel once more. Her lips parted in a trembling gasp. "David," she whispered. He cradled her, sobbing with relief. "I'm here, Em. I'm here." But the elder's expression remained grave. "This is not finished," Hung translated, his voice shaking. "She only leaves when she chooses, not when we send." I looked down at Emily. Her face was pale, her lips blue. Yet when she smiled weakly at David, I saw it, just for an instant, a flicker of black in her eyes, watching me. That night no one slept. Emily lay between us, pale but breathing. David refused to let go of her hand. Susan sat rigid, whispering prayers. Rachel clutched her recorder, though she no longer pressed play. Mark smoked in silence, his face unreadable. And I could feel her inside the room still. Not in the shadows, not in the air. Inside Emily, waiting. And every so often her lips moved in sleep, shaping the same words again and again. Stay. The days and nights blurred together after Emily's collapse. Sleep became a stranger to us. We existed only in fragments, shivering, whispering, waiting. Each of us clung to the fragile hope that the elder's chance had ended it, that Emily was safe, that whatever stalked us had finally gone back where it belonged. But the valley had grown too quiet, and quiet in that place was never safety. It was warning. On the third evening, the elder summoned us. We gathered in the square under a sky the color of old iron. No stars broke through the clouds. No moon dared to show its face. The villagers stood in a wide circle, torches in their hands, eyes lowered. At the center waited the altar again. Bowls of rice, burning herbs, incense thick enough to sting our eyes. The black curtain had been rehung, heavy and still. "This is the last night," Hung translated, his voice trembling. "The door will close. If she does not leave now, she will not leave at all." Emily leaned on David's arm, pale and fragile, though her eyes held that flicker I could not ignore. Rachel clutched her recorder, Susan her empty hands, Mark his final cigarette, and I stood hollow, waiting for what I knew was coming. The ritual began. The drums beat slowly, each strike shaking the ground. Flutes cried long and mournful, weaving through the villagers' chants. Smoke wrapped around us, clinging, suffocating. The elder's voice rose, raw and commanding. His words pulled at the air, tugging the veil between the living and the dead. And then, the curtain moved. A ripple, faint at first, then violent. It billowed though no wind touched it. From behind came the sound of breathing. The villagers fell silent, bowing low. The elder's chant grew louder. The curtain parted, and she stepped through. The woman in indigo. Her robe trailed damp across the earth. Her hair hung black and heavy, her face pale as wax. Those hollow eyes swept across the circle, pausing on each of us, measuring, waiting. When they reached me, my body went cold. "You," she whispered. Her lips barely moved, yet her voice filled the air, low and everywhere at once. "You heard me. You will stay," the elder shouted, his chant crashing like thunder. He thrust burning herbs toward her. The smoke coiled, hissing, but she did not flinch. Instead, she smiled and turned to Emily. Emily convulsed, gasping, clutching David's arm. Her eyes rolled black again, her lips parting with a ragged laugh. "She is mine," the voice said, though it came from Emily's mouth. David screamed her name, trying to hold her, but she flung him aside with inhuman force. He hit the ground, choking for air. Susan cried out. Rachel fumbled with her recorder. Mark lunged forward, trying to drag Emily back, but the woman in indigo lifted her hand. Mark froze mid-step, his body stiff as stone, cigarette dropping from his lips. The air thickened until I could not breathe. My lungs ached, my chest burned. And then, I felt her inside me. It was not touch, it was invasion. Cold fingers sliding beneath the ribs, breath stolen from my throat. My vision blurred, my limbs heavy. Her voice coiled inside my skull. Through you. I breathed. I staggered, gasping, clawing at my chest. Susan screamed. Rachel dropped her recorder. David struggled to rise, reaching desperately for Emily. The elder shouted louder, his chant rising to a roar. He hurled burning herbs into the air, the smoke surging in waves. The villagers struck the drums in violent rhythm. Each beat a desperate heartbeat. The woman shrieked. Through Emily, through me, through every shadow in the square. Her cries split the night, tearing at flesh and soul alike. The flames of the torches flared violently. One by one they extinguished. Darkness swallowed us. Only one light remained, a single candle on the altar, its flame trembling but unyielding. All eyes turned to it. The elder's voice dropped low, his words harsh and final. If she takes the last candle, she stays forever. The woman in indigo turned her gaze to me. She smiled, soft and terrible. Then she began to walk toward the altar. Emily's body moved with her, step for step. I stumbled forward without thinking, my body no longer my own. The pull inside me was unbearable, dragging me closer to that single flame. I don't remember deciding. I only remember running. Running past Susan's sobs, Rachel's cries, David's broken pleas. Running toward the altar, toward the candle. My hand closed around it just as the woman reached me. Her face was inches from mine, her breath colder than ice. Her eyes were endless, her voice the weight of centuries. Stay! I blew out the candle. Silence. The darkness was complete, pressing, eternal. And then, she was gone. No breath, no laughter, no presence. The weight lifted, the pull vanished. My chest filled with air that finally felt like mine. When the villagers relit their torches, the square was empty. The curtain hung still. The altar was bare. Emily lay unconscious on the ground, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. David wept over her, clinging as though he could hold her soul in place. Susan collapsed to her knees, shaking. Rachel's recorder flickered, its battery dead. Mark lit another cigarette with trembling hands, though his eyes glistened. And I stood before the extinguished candle, my lungs aching, my skin damp with sweat, my heart heavy. The elder approached. His face was grave, his eyes unreadable. It is finished, Hung translated softly. But when the elder looked at me, his gaze lingered too long, as though he knew something I did not. We left the valley the next morning. The van started as though it had never failed, the road down clear and passable. The villagers did not see us off. They watched from windows, silent, distant. Emily slept in David's arms the whole way. Susan clutched her empty hands. Rachel stared at her dead recorder. Mark smoked, and I sat quietly, watching the mist curl away behind us. But even as the mountains faded, even as the valley disappeared, I could feel it. A breath against my ear, soft, patient, waiting. You blew out the candle, but did you close the door? Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.